Hello, 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 New Haven, and welcome back to another episode of Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven. Arts Respond is a collaboration with the Arts Council of Greater New Haven and the New Haven Independent and WNHH, all things to which you should subscribe and read and listen, all for free, which is great. So I am your host, Lucy Gelman, and I am so excited to be here today for what is sort of an end of year, even though we're not at the end of the year yet, arts wrap up. Normally, this would be a little bit later, but as people may or may not know, I'm growing a human, and humans arrive when they want to. And so I was like, I don't know if this little person is going to arrive at some point before the show. So I am here with the fabulous Babz Rawls-Ivy. Really everyone on this call is fabulous. The fabulous Karen Ponzio, the fabulous Brian Slattery, who is the arts editor for the New Haven Independent. Karen is the fearless and also like maternal but like cool mom. Is that fair? Um,
Sure, whatever you get.
like
Sounds okay.
whenever your articles go up, I think of your byline as Mama KP. I hope that's okay.
Well, I
Um,
am a mama, so
You are a mama, I know. Um, and of course, Babz wears many, many hats, including editor of the Inner City News and host of Love Babz Love Talk, which you can catch every single morning. And if you've been sleeping on the show, don't sleep anymore. It's fun, especially Babz when you riff with Harry. But you always have the most wonderful guests on. So I'm glad to hop into this and just like let's talk about the arts this year. So Brian, I'm gonna kick it to you first. I know that we've talked a little bit about the fact that like people are still coming back from COVID, right? And this is something that
yes.
I've seen in my reporting, not only, but I would say especially in schools and how students are doing within the arts, but also like beyond the arts. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I was looking at my like year-end piece last year, and that was pretty much like the point I wanted to hammer home, mostly because it's what artists had told me, for the entire time that, we'd sort of been told that the pandemic was over and we should all just get back to business as usual, whatever the heck that meant. I've still don't really understand what it was we were supposed to be getting back to. But the I'd sort of been told like this is going to take a lot longer than we think, and I think that this year has sort of borne that out. That it's sort of like it's not that it like explains everything, but it's kind of like the underlying stressor, maybe if you will, that like sort of like makes everything just a little bit more complicated. Like there's still just a sense of like fragility to the whole thing, and we've seen that in the way that that it's like some institutions have closed, some are struggling, a lot of them are changing, and in some ways that's not I think that the tendency is to sort of talk about that like everything's on fire. I'm not that person. I think that we're just more like in a time of like real change, and some we're learning that our institutions are more fragile than we think they are, but also that like we have the what we need to build new ones, if we want to. And some of the really interesting questions are about that. Like um what kind of institutions do we want to be like making the gears of the arts worlds move in New Haven? What do we want them to look like? Who do we want to be in charge of them? uh how big do we want them to be? I mean, there's a million questions, and I think that they're all really interesting ones. And i I'm not worried that the art scene, I think that people will come up with the solutions that they need, and it'll be interesting to see what those really look like, um when all of that change is done. But I don't think it is done. Like, I think that it's going to be a pretty long term project. And uh, I find myself more thinking about like counseling people to be patient with that, because I think it's just going to take longer than anybody wants it to. But maybe that's okay. Instead of worrying so much that everything's going to implode at any minute. It's 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 like I don't see the point of being too worried about it. And as opposed to just like, let's get to work and see what we come up with, you know.
Yeah, so I want to stay on this thread, and Carrie and Babs, please feel free to jump in. I was going to save this for later in the discussion, but we're going there, right? So we have seen the closure and also the shift of multiple major arts institutions, and I would say legacy, like pretty historic arts institutions in the city. And then at the same time, we've also seen some of them kind of experimenting with varying degrees of success, right? And so I'm curious, I would love all of you to kind of say what you've seen that maybe has worked, maybe hasn't. Brian, I appreciate your this house is not on fire approach. I would say I tend to agree with it and also agree that like things will last longer than a finite and small period of time. Um, but we have seen, so earlier this year, I think it was in February that Lisa Dent left ArtSpace pretty abruptly. So resigned from ArtSpace, and then we saw them in June move out of their 50 Orange Street space, and they've been doing exhibitions in Creative Arts Workshop, which is at 80 Audubon Street. We also saw a lot of board turnover that was promised, but not delivered on or hasn't been delivered on yet at the Ely Center of Contemporary Art, and meetings that were sort of for community healing and then stopped, right? So there was that. I want to shout out Ruby Gonzalez Hernandez, who held something called the Artist State of the Union earlier this year in, I think, late August, early September, if I'm not mistaken, talking about this big question of what are institutions, how much should we rely on them, how can we hold them accountable, and also how have artists been harmed by institutions in our community. So there's all of that, and then at the same time, sort of institutions are having trouble, I think, bringing audiences back after COVID and trying with a lot of different models. Of course, I'm thinking about Long Wharf Theater, which has moved fully into itinerancy. So we're seeing like all of these different things, right?
I mean,
just jump in.
This is what I think. I think the pandemic was not the cause of this. I think the pandemic just highlighted and illuminating what was already happening across art universes, right? So, I mean, art producing, art sustaining organizations have started to see the downward spiral of a disappearing audience or a changing audience, and how to deal with a aging white audience, as well as amplify BIPOC voices in those spaces, has been illuminating. And so the pandemic just really spotlighted and highlighted the problems that was going on across the board. I mean, recruiting board members is challenging. Amplifying new playwright voices is challenging. Getting people back into the theater is challenging. But yet and still, art in and of itself will be with us. It will find a way to happen. And the Long Wharf itinerancy is really an example of art will survive, art will thrive, because people need art. And art is the foundation for any civilized society to move forward. So we're never going to not have art. That's just not going to happen. Plus, people who are called to be artists, it is in them to do it. It's in their DNA. They're going to write. They're going to sing. They're going to dance. They're gonna do all manner of things. So I'm not worried about art. What I'm worried about is trying to sort of get people to sort of change their mind about how art is delivered and be open to embracing new opportunities to participate, to engage in, and to witness art and artistic expression.
I mean, I think they'd like to make it more concrete, like a lot of what we're talking about is how artists are going to get like paid. That's that. Like, it's the point of, I feel like that's the point of an art institution. Like, you can be like, look, I'm a musician myself. I play music all the time. if I play in public for people, I expect to be paid for it. And like the point of an institution is to put money in my pocket. End of story. And if it's not doing that, I question why it exists as a musician. And like I think like those are two questions that I want to separate harshly all the time, because that's really what we're talking about here. And I think that's been the fun in a way of seeing how this all shakes out. That like, I think that artists now feel pretty emboldened, and it's fair for them to ask, like, what are you going to do for me? And to say what they mean is, how much money am I getting from you? And then like that's sort of the bottom line here.
I think
And
money, yes, but that isn't the only currency. Like, I think that there has also been this
it's the only one that pays
discussion.
your rent.
Yeah, no, that is correct.
You
But
know?
I also think there's been this discussion that as a millennial who sometimes am told that I sound a little like a boomer by the young people that I teach who are in high school. But I think there's also been this shift of like, we're not going to take this behavior that for a long time people were like, yeah, well, you're in the arts, so you're going to be treated kind of in a subpar way and tough noogies, and that's just it. And I really like that I've been seeing a lot of folks who are like, actually, no, you can't verbally harass me in the workplace. Or actually, no, you can't make that comment about my boobs just because I happen to be a female musician and you happen to have come to my show and you feel entitled to do so. And so that I think is something that is really good, a really good shift that I have
Yeah.
been seeing. Karen, I see you nodding, and I want to have you, and I know that we have talked about misogyny many times off mic and could have probably like a whole 4-part series about it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
jump on in.
Yeah. So I also was teaching for a while through the pandemic. I was teaching, and that was my first experience teaching high school students, in art school at ECA. And I felt the same thing of like, they don't tolerate, the strength of a lot of them when people would say, oh, kid, you always hear that phrase like kids these days. Well, I tell you, between my experience at ECA and then my experience, I would say, since COVID, back out in the art scene because the other thing I think that needs to be mentioned as we're talking about COVID is there are a lot of new faces on the scene that were not there before COVID because they weren't old enough. They just weren't out, or they didn't live here. A lot of people, I don't want to say kids, a lot of, because I'm leaning towards kids because of my age and they're my kids' ages, but a lot of people moved here after college. A lot of people decided to come to New Haven during 2020 and in the past couple of years. I won't say post-COVID because COVID's still around. I think we need to remember that a lot of people that are now in the scene have not lived in the scene that many other people have lived in. So they don't have the attachments to the institutions and the things that a lot of people were used to. And we're saying, like, when Brian was saying, like, is everything on fire? Are things going to come back to what they were? What does that even mean? To add on to that, like, for a lot of these people, I don't think that matters. What matters is where can they create, and who can they create with? Because that to me is a huge part of what this past year has shown. The stuff that I've reported on, a lot of what I've reported on are these groups that got together where just one person was like, hey, I want to draw. I want to see if some other people want to draw. Let me put a call out on Instagram. And now they have a group that meets every week. And how many have I reported on that? Like 4 or 5 groups.
Oh yeah, I love that.
I mean, the New Haven Sketchers group that got together, they had a show, a creative arts workshop with their sketches just in the past month. I ended up doing that. So people are going, again, I know that the idea of being paid obviously is a huge issue, but I also wanted to come in and say that I think that there are a lot of people on the scene that are going to be okay with things being different because
Right.
they're not different for them. They never were a part of their lives anyway. So, change is constant. And, receiving new people, new experiences. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, once you stop doing that, what else is there?
And I
You
want
know?
to ask about I mean, I feel like DIY grassroots spaces have always had a moment, right? Like they've always been, and it's always so funny to talk to folks who, Karen, I think to your point, like maybe weren't old enough to participate in those spaces, maybe weren't familiar with those spaces because they didn't live in New Haven at the time. But like I've talked to people who don't know that Daggett Street was a thing, right? And if you don't know what we're talking about, that's a whole other episode, but just look up Daggett Street Square in the New Haven Independent and you will find robust archives about what it was and why it was a vital and really special and sacred place to artists. But I think, Brian, you and I have both noticed, and Karen, you've done a ton of reporting here, spaces like Volume 2, where when Roger Ullhein decided to close Never Ending Books, there was a collective of mostly young artists who came together who said, we want this space to create, to be able to create. And they've created something really, really cool. And so what sort of grassroots efforts are you seeing? As Brian, I think you're absolutely right. Folks, especially younger artists, are moving away from institutions.
I mean, I think we've already named several of them. Like there's that, I mean, volume 2 is a great example because it's doing a pretty neat job of threading the needle between, like, it's, there's some very official things about it, right? It's an incorporated nonprofit. It does fundraising. But it's retaining, I think that there's a sense of, I mean, if you look at the history of the institutions we have now, like there's a sense that they all started looking like Volume 2, and then they sort of like, there's always this, American thing of like, let's get bigger and bigger and bigger, and let's get more and more and more professional. And that's, then you like fast forward 30 years and everybody thinks that they're like the man that they want to stick it to, right? But like the Volume 2 at this point is doing a pretty interesting job of like keeping those elements in balance, right? Like they're not looking for a bigger space. They're not even looking to like clean up the space that they have very much, right?
Which is sort of great. It's if
I love
folks
it.
haven't been in there,
right? Like they appreciate that, like that they've done a lot of cleaning, but like it's not like they're not making it into like a brand new space. They're not.
It's a space that feels lived in, which I think is
absolutely. I mean, they kept a lot of the stuff that's been there for like Lord knows how long, right? Like, and that's a really visible version of that. I think that I think that a lot of when you say spaces, I think a lot of them aren't permanent.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's more like there's been a lot of gatherings, that happen in like various places and then they vanish because it's, well, for starters, because it's cheaper. It's like you don't have to pay rent on anything. And that's I think that we're seeing a lot of that, and I'm seeing a lot of that myself as like a musician as well. Like there's a lot more house concerts. There's a lot less like, let's just like go to clubs and bars, and there's a lot more, let's do things in people's living room.
Yeah. Babz, I want to bring you back in and ask you, because I feel like you're everywhere. If you don't follow the fabulous Babz Rawls-Ivy on social media, you should, because it will tell you everything you're missing, or maybe don't. Like if you struggle from FOMO, don't, because your FOMO might kill you. But truly, like I feel like you're everywhere, and I'm always like, how does she do this much stuff in one? Like, have you found a way to stretch time?
No, you know what? It's just like anything. And there's a lot of stuff that I don't get to. That's the part that I want people to understand, that I even though it looks like I go to a lot of stuff, and Karen, I see you in spaces. Brian, I see you. Like I run into them all the time in spaces. But there's so much stuff that we don't get to, that I know that I don't get to. And and I talk about this on my show all the time. I said, when you see me at something, I've already wrestled with, what am I going to go to? Like, what am I going to go to? And sometimes it's rock, paper, scissors, right? Like sometimes it's Or do I know somebody in that production that I really need to go support? Or do I have a hand in something? So that's how I make the decisions to show up to where I show up. And then, mostly just because stuff is fun, right? Like there's some cool stuff going on. And to your point, Brian, when we were doing Jazz Where, we were already being in unconventional spaces before people were being in unconventional spaces. Like we're gonna play jazz over in the rotunda of the New Haven Museum. And they even thought that was crazy until it was done. And then they were like, oh, this is a whole new space we could get people to use. I was like, yeah. So the
Or
nature of places
Trey
is
Moore and
changing.
Seeing Sounds, right?
Right.
Like he turned that skate park into this like super, super cool thing. And it
With
lasted
2 stages this year.
Yeah. And it lasted for a weekend and it was gone. And it was awesome.
Then it was gone. And then, and now
and
it's not like
it'll be great.
You could do it again, right? And people are like, oh,
Yeah.
that was so cool. Let's do it again. And then they'll add something else to it to make it even more cooler or whatever. And now people start thinking unconventionally about, where they perform and where performances can happen. I mean, I think that's the nature of art for me, right? Like let's do something different. Let's get out of these theaters. Let's get out of these buildings and get into the streets or interesting places in these streets that people don't think about as performance spaces. And they don't have to be huge venues. That's the other part.
No.
Everybody wants intimate, smaller, personal experiences, with people, right? Like not these big arena kind of things, but I want to sit in a space with 20 other people or 40 other people or 10 other people and experience this performance.
Well, and that's also, I mean, I've long had this bias. I have a huge bias for small theaters and black box theaters, especially where there's like no bad seat in the house, because I've realized that if you go to a big theater, like the Yale Rep, and I will say I love the Yale Rep. Everyone should go see The Salvagers, the world premiere of which is on right now. Brian Slattery has a fabulous article on the New Haven Independent that you should absolutely read. But first see the play and then read the article, or I don't know, do whatever you want. But one of the things I've realized is like you are seeing a different play depending on where you are in that theater. Having seen like multiple performances of a single show from different seats in the house. And that can be hard. Whereas if you're at a collective consciousness theater or at a space, the Space Ballroom, I don't know, my brain is cheese right now. So, but, or in a space like that where you've got a really intimate setup, or a Bregamos, for instance, you're really like, there is not a bad seat in the house. And so I would say I totally share that bias that came long before COVID. So I also want to remind folks, if you're just joining us, this is Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. And I am here with the fabulous Karen Ponzio, Brian Slattery, and Babz Rawls-Ivy. We're talking about the arts, which is like always a fun thing to talk about, but I also can't believe it's been a year. Like I don't know where time went. And I want to just talk about like some performances that really stayed with you, because every year inevitably, and I will say this with like immense love for artists and the artists who I've had the pleasure and the honor of documenting this year. And Babz, you're absolutely right. Like Brian and I often joke about how we miss probably 85% of things, even though we are always working, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, Brian knows this. Sometimes I'll email him and say, there are 11 things this weekend. Which 2 are you covering? I'll cover a different 2. So that way, we won't duplicate each other's work and we'll spread the love. So what are some performances that have really stayed with you this year?
I think of one that was, so I went to cover Big Fat Combo at Best Video. So talk about a place now, Best Video has changed a lot of their programming, and a lot of it has been just, I mean, it's been fantastic what they've been doing. They've really been doing some interesting things. So Big Fat Combo has played there a lot. Will I'm sure continue to play there a lot. I'm going to the show. I'm going to write about it, and the PA stops working. So so now they can't get any vocals, and this is a band that could have played an entire show of instrumentals. And I'm sitting there, and people are sitting there, and they're playing around, and I messaged Brian, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to have an article, but this is what's going on. Yeah, I'm not leaving. Nobody nobody there knew I was writing. Well, maybe a couple people next to me knew I was writing about it, but it organically morphed into this amazing story of community, because Tom Hearn, amazing artist, like which one of my friends is the loudest, and he calls up people to sing from the audience, who just happen to be in the audience, to sing with the band that don't need a microphone. While he's doing this, Dean Falcone, the amazing Dean Falcone, goes home and gets his PA and comes back and hooks it up. And the show goes on. And I'm just like taking pictures, taking video, making notes. And it's like, it is the most incredible thing. And, people there are like, this is incredible. Afterwards, I'm like, I can't believe this almost didn't happen. I can't believe I got it down. They're like, wait a minute, you're writing about this? And it ended up being, I said to Brian, no, I got the story, and it's amazing. And I get it in, and Brian's like, oh my God, this story. And it really, I can't tell you how many people were like, that's one of the best stories you've ever written. I'm like, no, thank you. But also, it's one of the best stories to happen. I happen to be there. Like, that's when I got to say, today is actually the 7th anniversary of Brian asking me to do this job.
Yay!
So
Happy anniversary!
Thank you. And thank you, Brian. But one of exactly right. But one of it really drove home that this is journalism, that arts journalism. I happened to be there and got to take notes and document an amazing thing that happened in the arts, because it was such a way that community and people came together, and it really was heartwarming, and it was fun and funny and cool. Yeah. So that's that one will stick with me.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. And I hope that you and Brian are you usually do a top 10 of shows, like music shows. And
we haven't done that in a while because of this, neither one of us have.
I love them. So, but I think you're right. And like, artists do show up for each other. And I hope this is true beyond New Haven, but I have seen a lot of that. Like, I got you. I got your back. Something breaks, I got you. And that's really powerful. Brian, I'm gonna throw it to you.
I mean, I think Karen's story is the best one.
Thank you. That's what you told me.
No, I'm right. No, it's the best one. It's the best one. Still getting around that. There's sort of two, and I think it's that, like, they stand out in my mind, but also I think that they fit a lot into the kind of thing that we're talking about. One of them was just like a show at Neverending Books. It was like, what was interesting about it is that it was a good example of what we're talking about, in the sense that it was like a 3 bands bill, but it was the sort of thing that would have happened in a more regular club, maybe 5 years ago. The band was sort of high profile enough that that could have been the case, and they were really good. Like, they were they were really good, but it's clear that like something has changed in the way that the touring structure is, and most of it is that it's become much more expensive to do it. And so a lot of bands have decided that like certain sort of like mid-level things that used to be worth it aren't really worth it anymore, and so they set up a lot more things that feel more like house shows, mostly because they do better on them financially, and the communities that are around those musicians tend to support them. They put them up, they feed them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it all sort of adds up. This particular band was called Maya Elise and the Good Dream, and they're from somewhere on the West Coast, somewhere in California. Can't remember. But what made it great was that it was just like a really good band in a really small place. and they didn't really need a sound system, and it made it really beautiful. Like their recorded music is really good, but like live, sitting really close to them and like having everything be like really intimate was like really profound. And it kind of like reminded me again that it was one of those like, you know, the musicians are going to be fine. The industry is maybe screwed, but you know, screw them. We don't really need them. And we're all going to be okay. The second one is similar in the sense that I hosted a band. I had them here for a week, and they asked if they could just do a house concert to like try out some new material. And they had like several gigs kind of locally, so I couldn't even like publicize it that much. And so, you know, I got like maybe was it 15 or 20 people to show up, just so they had enough of an audience so that they could like, you know, feel like they were performing for people instead of just practicing. And it was just the same idea. Like you sort of realize like all of this is going to be fine. You know, the art is going to be fine. Musicians are going to be fine. If you're a middle manager at Sony or Live Nation, maybe you're in trouble. But you know, you can go middle manage something else.
Right. I was gonna say I'm like actually fully okay with that.
Oh yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I think what's cool is that there's like, to the extent there's like something is washing out for all of this, I think that there is a tendency for people to realize that there's such a thing as too big for an organization. And we don't exactly know what that size is, and maybe it depends on a lot of different variables. But, you know, there's a sense of like, maybe we can get by with a constellation of smaller places. And maybe that's actually going to be both more efficient and more humane, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, there'll be less like hundreds of thousands of dollars blown on people's salaries who just sit around answering emails all day. And maybe more of those will go into the pockets of the artists. And, and then, you know, and then also, of course, like the managers who do a lot of work and you do need something, you know, and I think we're sort of figuring out what that is.
Babz, Rawls-Ivy, I want to ask you, what are some performances that have stayed with you this year?
Oh, I loved everything that the New Haven Symphony Orchestra did around Bonds, Hagen, and Price, those three Black women composers.
That was an outstanding concert. I thought Michelle Can was going to blow the roof off of the Lyman Center.
Well, you know, they spent 2 seasons amplifying and showcasing and centering these three Black women composers, and gave us a real lesson in the history of these women composers. And I would give New Haven Symphony Orchestra credit for single-handedly getting the rest of this country to want to play the music of these women. And now I see people all over the country playing this music of Miss Price and all these folks. And so for me, that was quite moving. I think at the beginning of the year, Freedom Dreams at the Creative Arts Workshop, I've never seen that much Black art in that space all at once. I just never seen it. I've never seen that many Black people go see Black art in that space, you know. And so I was, and not because I was a part of it, but because the talent that was in it was just amazing. And that's how you take your own talent from your own town and center them and elevate them, you know. Linda Meckens and the young sister, I think her name is Natalie. Is it Natalie? Nicole.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Jasmine Nicole. She's
Jasmine
amazing.
Nicole.
She is amazing. Yeah.
I've got some of her artwork, but you know, to have her to be centered in that voice. Families of Ife Gardine, by the photographer who just picked, you know, curated the pictures to go on the wall, blown up. I mean, that stayed with me. I liked the Arts and Ideas centering Black Greek life with the homecoming kind of vibe, which folks didn't. A lot of folks had no idea that there were so many Black Greeks in Connecticut and in New Haven proper. And so that was, you know, all these teachable moments about history and culture that people just don't know unless we bring it to them. I liked everything about Black Wall Street, which centered a lot of artists. I thought clearly was an art opportunity, because there was so many artists, whether it was artisans who made stuff or performers. I mean, I thought that was just fantastic. So, I mean, there was a lot of little moments throughout the year where I love people playing at Possible Futures. They had the school kids played, like kids, played at Possible Futures, and people came to see them play, right? I was like, this is really, really cool. So it's a lot of those kinds of events that was moving to me.
And that was during like a torrential downpour. You're talking about Henry Lugo's string students.
Yes.
Played at Possible Futures. And that was like it was pouring. The streets were flooding. New Haven does not have good infrastructure for climate change, which is a different episode, probably happening next year. But people came. And God bless book angel Lauren Anderson, who reconfigured the entire space to fit a student string orchestra of like 30 children. And they played beautifully.
They did.
Yeah, shout out
with full on heart. And people came to see them. And people who would not even be in that neighborhood, right? Yeah. Like who just would be like, oh no, I'm not going there. But was there because their kids were playing there. So.
That's right.
I'd like to just to put the little tangent on like what Babz was saying about the symphony orchestra, which is a great example of a institution that is like radically transforming what it's doing in like several different ways. Like there's a lot of talk in the classical world about what should be being done, and the symphony orchestra is actually doing quite a lot of it. And it's like from the choice of composers to where they perform. There's so much more, like they actually show up in schools, in community centers, and they keep doing the thing that like makes an orchestra, right? Which is that they get together in a big concert hall and do big works. And they should, and the idea that they're managing to do all of those things at once is really showing a way that, you can stop wringing your hands and you can instead, get down to the business of actually programming more diverse music and playing in more diverse spaces.
And just like doing the thing, doable. Right?
Yeah, just do it already.
And Brian, you and I have talked about this. Instead of talking about doing the thing and really belaboring a point, just do the thing, right?
They're doing it. They've been doing it for a year, Yeah.
That leads me to another question that I wanted to ask. But at first I wanted to say, since I asked all of y'all, I just want to say, like, don't sleep on school theater. It's some of the best theater and also the cheapest theater. Not just you should spend money on arts and culture. If you happen to be listening and you're a rich person, spend a lot of money on arts and culture, please. Artists need your dollars, and spend it all over the city of New Haven and greater New Haven if you feel called to do so. So that was not me saying, but I will say we've seen some wonderful student performances this year. I know we're coming into a weekend where Elm Shakespeare is having just this like fantastically collaborative student youth theater festival, which makes me so happy. It's not competitive. Students are invited to see each other's work. And we've seen a lot of growth, partly because Elm Shakespeare was lucky to get a grant this year that expanded its theater opportunities. So for years, it's been doing really cool work at Morris Sheridan School, and I want to shout that out. But this year, it expanded to Metropolitan Business Academy and did like a 45-minute abridged Midsummer Night's Dream that was one of the best performances I've seen. It was just so good. It was really, really good. They did a Hamlet earlier this year with 2 Hamlets that Brian Slattery, I think you and I were in the same audience, and again, like blew my mind. It was really, really good. And I often think this, like it is young people and teenagers who maybe are best positioned to perform Shakespeare. Some Shakespeare, like Hamlet should be a teenager, right?
Right. I mean,
Romeo and Juliet should be teenagers, right? Like they shouldn't be in their whatever. I've seen good. I don't want to get in trouble for ageism for something I say over there.
Well, right? But we can admit that it can be a little weird to have like a 50-year-old playing a 15.
Yeah. Right, like Romeo and Juliet is a play about 2 children who are so
horny
about
teenagers, right?
That they've forgotten how to like use their common sense, right? And then it's also about people who have beef with each other and they can't even remember why they're beefing. they've just always had beef with each other. And so, and that is like, you should have teenagers in that play. So yeah, so don't sleep on student theater. That's been some of the best work that I have seen this year. Including, I also want to shout out just Hill House High School and Ty Scurry, who's been doing work at James Hill House High School and New Haven Academy. Brian, I know you've also had the pleasure of documenting some of Ty's work. But Hill House is really doing theater on a shoestring, which they should not have to. They should get robust funding from the New Haven Public Schools District to have an actual theater department. But these students put on a Little Shop of Horrors that not only won statewide awards, but was like the most scrappy and beautiful production that I've seen. And Little Shop is like, it is a show that can be hard, I think, for
It has
high
technical
school.
things.
Yeah.
Right? It has technical things that
And
take work.
it was amazing. So shout out to all of those. And then Babz, I agree. I was profoundly moved by some of the work that the New Haven Symphony Orchestra did this year.
Yeah.
So I want to ask all of you, as we are looking at performances across the board in institutions, outside of institutions, in institutions that maybe are pivoting, like what are some of the things that are working? What are some of the things that like seem like maybe they're not working? And I also want to highlight, like, we should be giving folks the permission to fail, right? That is part of the arts.
Mm.
Mhm.
Well, this is what I'm gonna say. I'm a ring the bell for Arts Council of Greater New Haven, because during the pandemic we made sure BIPOC artists got support. So much so that the other organizations saw us doing this and wanted us to keep doing it and giving us money to do it. Like the City of New Haven, right, and the Cultural Affairs folks, like the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, and like the Mellon Foundation, because they understood, they saw what we saw, that there's folks out here that needed to be centered and taken care of, and we led the case for that and did a great job, and made it very easy to get funding to BIPOC artists, like just made it easy so that there was no red tape, no whatever. It was just, this is what we're going to do. We streamlined the structure and became quite efficient at it. So I'm very proud of that commitment to artists. And that's really what we've got to sort of get these large organizations to understand, that, supporting artists is not just giving them a venue, making sure that they have what they need so that they can live productive lives. They got to pay their rent. They got to eat. They got to, they got bills. They got to keep the lights on. They got to buy their supply. They got to do all these things. And somebody has to gatekeep that. Like, somebody has to have their eye on the wheel for artists in that way. And I'm so glad that the Arts Council was ahead of its time doing that.
Brian and Karen, like, what's some stuff you're seeing where you're like, wow, this is really working? Or like, maybe you're like, maybe it's not working.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, I'm trying to think about something that we haven't talked about already. That's all.
I think there are a lot of places in the city where just like stuff has popped up.
Well,
and
I
everything,
can actually, actually, I was thinking, I don't know if I can, you guys mentioned possible futures. That's what I was had in my mind. So I'll come back to that. So you think of like Never Ending Books, Volume 2, Surrounded by Books, Possible Futures, all of these, one event after the other, even if it's not book related, surrounded by books. You're at Best Video, surrounded by movies. There's been shows and events at Strange Ways, surrounded by all kinds of art there, all kinds of different things there. I don't know if I can say the name of it. Which can I say?
Yeah, it's a proper name. You can say, yeah, which bitch there.
Okay, wasn't sure, didn't want to do that to you, Lucy. Another place opened up the Black Box there, and has shows, art. You can just come in and vibe, So these spaces, like Babz had mentioned, unconventional spaces, that maybe people wouldn't think this is where I'm going to hear music. This is where I'm going to go to a meeting for a club. This is where, there's like, album club. You can listen to the album and different the zine workshops, the zine scene, all these different things. And everybody, and the biggest message through all of them is that everyone is welcome. It's not just a clique of people doing something. It's not just people that are all friends that went there and did something. I mean, obviously there's people who are friends doing it, or people making friends. That's the other thing, is that's where the connections and the friends are made. So like the color and sound event that I went to the other night at
Cafe 9, yes.
And Andre said, he's like, I met all of these people at a bunch of different events in New Haven.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to do this thing. And the idea of somebody saying, I want to do this thing, where can I do it? And them going to the place, and that place saying, you know what, do it.
Yeah.
So is it going to be something that happens once a week, once a month, once a year? Who knows? But I've been seeing more of that this year. And those events just, to me, are so, I don't know, there's something about them. They're just so, I want to say heartwarming, but they kind of are. That's where my mama stuff kicks in. So I look and I go, Hercules, Eddie Murphy. I say it to them a lot of them all the time. I'm like, I swear to God, I'm at these things and I'm just like, everybody's proud mom. I'm so happy. I'm so happy for these. Again, I don't want to say kids. I try not to do that, but these people.
You could say kids. It's okay.
But that are doing these amazing, wonderful, fun, interesting, innovative things. That's what art is. Like, if that's not happening, what's the point? What is the point? Brian always talks about, being somebody who's, teaching children and helping, music lessons and helping, younger musicians, learn and come along. And I mean, that should be happening in every aspect of art. I think even as a fan, like say, Babz, you're such a patron of the arts. I mean, showing up people like, this is where other places to go, or I've discovered this artist, go take a look at them, look at their stuff.
Right.
I would like to see more city support for more spaces that are focused on the arts, because I think that the one sort of piece of the puzzle that's kind of hard right now is for people who aren't already plugged in to figure out how to get involved in it, how to find it. And I think that like there is a place for more permanent places that have a full schedule, so that people know, oh, if I go here, I'm going to see something, whether it's a visual art thing or a music thing or a theater, like who knows what. I would like to see more city support for actual spaces.
I do want to
not have it be that it just happens because individuals decide that they want to make it happen.
Yeah, I do want to lift up. I think there are two exciting things. So one, and this is funny because there was not city support, and then Juan Carlos Soto, who's the head of the New Haven Pride Center, sort of said like, yo, where is the city with supporting us on a physical space that is not in a basement, that does not force LGBTQ plus folks to go literally to a basement with no windows. And the Ellicker administration listened, which was great, and said, you know what, we're going to put you in the city budget, and we're also going to connect you with more state support. So I will say, I want to shout out, one, that I think that's very possible, Brian, but two, that within the city, part of that problem is we have a tiny arts, culture, and tourism. The Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism is right now 3 people. It's and
they do a lot of damn work with this.
They do a lot of work. It's Adrian Jefferson, Kim Cattrall, and just really, really quickly, I'm going to let folks know we're going to run a couple minutes over on the Facebook's live, but we are not going to be on the radio. So if you're broadcasting radio, if you're old school like that, which I love, just follow us on Facebook instead. But Brian, I think you're right, and do want to lift up just that it's like, it's a small department, and I think there could also be more city support for the Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism, because when we're also talking about things like,
absolutely, and that's more what I'm talking about. It's not so much that it's
right.
there just needs to be more of it.
Yeah, because when we're talking about things also, like this city, the city administration has talked a big game about things like harm reduction in the city, right? Crime reduction. And we know, like the data doesn't lie. We know that if kids, but also grown-ups, are in programs that are enriching and life-giving, that are often tied to arts and culture, we know that if you have libraries that are open for longer and 7 days a week, like harm in the city goes down.
Well,
Crime in
also
the city
like
goes down.
I mean
It's
my
not rocket science.
and my biggest axe to grind about this is that the city currently is like, and a lot of developers are cashing in big time on the fact that New Haven is cool.
That's right.
And the
That's
thing that
right.
makes New Haven cool is its culture. End of story. People are making
Yeah.
millions of dollars at the moment.
Well, I mean,
Off of
I say
this.
this everywhere I go, that the arts community in this city has to be seen as a real economic driver. I mean, it just
Yeah.
has to take its rightful
Yeah.
place
That's right.
as reasons why people want to live, work, and play here. That it is part of the economic ecosystem. That people work in the arts, and that's part of what makes this city so cool and so hip, that people can actually work in the arts in this city. And we need more support around seeing that as an economic driver.
And we now know, thanks to Americans for the Arts, that in Connecticut, last year alone, the arts were almost a $1 billion sector. And I'm trying to find the number, but we know that within New Haven, I'm looking. Okay, so in last year alone, the arts generated 954.1 million in the state, and in the city of New Haven, that was 143.4 million. So anyone who has beefed with our saying that we're the cultural capital of Connecticut, we actually are the cultural, like we are the 18.7 square mile, 135,000 person cultural capital of Connecticut. Someone from Hartford maybe will fight me on that, and that's fine. But we win. And so Babz, yeah, I think you're right. And I think Brian, you're absolutely right too. Like all of these new developments have been going up. Someone told me that on the new developments on Munson Street, I think for a 2-bedroom, it's like $4,400 a month, which I don't know who's living there. It's not going to be me. Um, but I mean, like, good for you if you are listening to this and you're one of the people moving in. But so as we wind down, I want to ask all of you, what are you doing in these last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks of the year that is sort of feeding your soul from an arts and cultural perspective? And also, how are you caring for yourself? Because I will say the arts are life-giving, and this has also been a really hard year.
I rest constantly. The Nat Ministry. If you guys have ever read, anybody who's ever read that,
Yeah,
No, we know,
yeah, I know you guys know, but out there in the world, if anybody's listening and watching this and hasn't heard about it, because I know that this crew knows it. But yeah, and just since I had my surgery, like the idea of resting and knowing that that's important. And I'll say to Brian, like I did this thing, I'm good for this week. I used to be out. I used to be out many nights a week, and I know now that as I get older and different things happening, that I can't do that well if I'm not resting in between. So I have, I think, 3 more things to cover before the year ends for me at the Indy, and in between that, I will be curled up in a blanket. I will be taking lovely walks on doing all kinds of things that writing my own poetry and things like that, and yeah, feeding my body with rest just as much as with anything else. So yeah, and
I
I
love that.
highly recommend everybody else to do that as well. You will not be punished for resting in between all the amazing things you do.
Brian.
Most of it is about unplugging
Mm.
for hours a day, and I'm probably never going back. That's about it. So, bye, everybody. Bye.
I love that. I mean, I'm about to unplug for 3 months, y'all. So I'm cool with that.
Yeah, consider never plugging back in.
That
Well,
might be a problem with my workplace. I don't know. Babz is our board chair, so she can let me know.
I'm not plugging out, or I'm still plugged in. I'm getting ready to have a more The World Needs More Love Letter writing campaign in a couple of weeks at Possible Futures bookstore, and the Christmas Carol for Newhallville is going up in the next couple of days. So I'm looking forward to the end of the year singing and writing love letters. That's what I'm going to do.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Well, I want to thank you all for being with me here on Arts Respond on WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven. This has been beautiful. Listeners, if I don't see you for the rest of the year, I'm going to schedule some more shows, but I might pop out a baby. So, we don't know.
We're waiting for the light. We're waiting.
We're waiting. Yeah. I also want to shout out Harry Droz, who is the man behind the magic. Without Harry, none of this would be possible. Harry, we appreciate you and we love you. Play us out.
Good to see you, Karen and Brian.